Paul Colby, it's always great to talk with you, and thank you for joining us today in the Cypher Brief studio.
Good to see you.
We uh, we had some pretty big news coming out over the last 24 hours. Yet again, Ukraine has demonstrated a pretty remarkable ability to strike inside of Russia, this time at a number of military locations, reportedly destroying a number of strategic missile-capable aircraft. Including all the way into Siberia for this one. Just want to start. What was your reaction when you started seeing these headlines and reading about this latest attack?
Once again, just gobsmacked at Ukraine's audacity, capability, and execution of this time an absolutely strategic mission, which impacts Russia not only in their immediate ability to deliver weapons and bombs into Ukraine on a nightly basis, but also carries strategic implications for the war in Ukraine, for Europe, and for the United States.
It it was, it was not only an attack with what we are reading about, if anyway, with devastating results for Russia, but as you say, a lot of people are using that word strategic. How big of a deal was this from a security failure on Russia's point?
Well, look, if overnight the United States lost half of its or well, one third of its nuclear capable bomber force, heads would be rolling at every level of the military. President, Congress, everyone else would be freaking out. And we can talk a little bit further about the implications in terms of US's own security and plans and planning. But for Russia to lose these bombers, which they're no longer producing, these bombers that can carry cruise missiles, that can carry the heavy weapons loads, and can fly the distances that they need to get to Ukraine to launch the missiles and return home, let alone to patrol the coasts of Europe, of UK, of the United States. Really is a huge deal for them. They will not be able to replace this capability anytime in the next decade or decades, and their ability to strike any target, specifically Ukraine, but any other target they might be thinking about down the road in terms of their own deterrence and their own threat posture is profoundly impacted.
We've talked, you and I have talked, as with a number of your colleagues over the last, going on 3 years now about Ukraine's strikes and hitting Russian oil infrastructure and, more recently, military locations much closer to Ukraine. We've seen a steady uptick of these kinds of attacks in ways that still would have just been unthinkable 2 or 3 years ago. Certainly earlier back in your career, it would have been difficult to imagine headlines like this. What do you think the conversations inside the Kremlin are centering around today? Is this a we have got to fix the security posture, or is this a we've got to retaliate more kind of a conversation? Do you
Well,
imagine that they're
it's
having
certainly
in
going
there?
to be both. They'll be doing their lessons learned of how did they do this. Just as after the Kerch Bridge bombing, they're going to be looking back and trying to unravel how it was done, where their weak points in their security are, what they need to beef up. You already see these huge traffic jams in different parts of Russia as every semi truck on the road being stopped and searched as a potential drone carrier, right? So you think about aircraft carriers that carry aircraft across long distances. They're using semi trucks with drones hidden in the rooftop panels. And not just onesies and twosies, but dozens and hundreds. They don't know if there's more out there. They don't know if there's ones waiting to be deployed again. May well be. Who knows? Um, but I'm so impressed in so many different ways at Ukraine's capability, starting with the vision that they have to mount an absolutely audacious attack across huge distances, far, far beyond enemy lines, to be able to have the networks, to be able to do this, to be able to put into place the vehicles, the weapons, the explosives, the command and control that went with this, to be able to pilot these drones from 3,000 kilometers away and fly them into the fuselage of these aircrafts. The uh, strategic vision of what they're going after. They, absolutely were going big in this. They weren't looking for a tactical effect. They were sending a message, particularly in terms of the light of, Ukraine being accused of not having any cards, of being on its back foot, of losing the war. Well, this clearly shows A, they have cards. B, they're not on the back foot, they're on the forefoot, and they have lots of options. And I am certain there's other plans that are in gestation stage, development stage, and execution stage that are waiting to be unleashed on Russia.
How big of an impact do you think that this is going to have on the ongoing talks? Is this something that Russia is going to have to acknowledge as, a significant deterrent on Ukraine's part, no matter what they say publicly, which they'll of course try to, downplay the significance of this? You think it's going to have any impact in that room in Istanbul?
Well, I mean, certainly it has an impact inside the heads of all the participants in the conversation, Ukrainian and Russian. But since the talks had zero future as they're currently lined up, there's no material impact. It's not that this is, snatched some sort of piece from the, from uh, uh, or derailed a peace process that was, just about to flower into some sort of agreement. Russians are simply playing for time. They're playing rope a dope. They're uh, uh, looking at their summer offensive, which they're massing forces for, and they're looking to continue to grind Ukraine down, and to wear down the West's will, U.S. and Europe, to support Ukraine. And that's what Putin's counting on, that will have a failure of will to support Ukraine, which is in this existential fight.
We have seen recently some European nations really escalating their own sort of security posture, military capability. For example, in the Black Sea, to enhance maritime security, against the threats that they say are Russian sabotage and sort of the gray zone nature. Do you do you anticipate that being a risk that now might be heightened after something like this? We've seen already a pretty strong, steady tick of sabotage across Europe and other parts of the world. Is that something that's on your mind after you see something like this?
Well, look, I mean, a lot of people will be wringing their hands and saying, "Oh my goodness, this was a provocative action." Russia is now going to double down on its efforts to both attack Ukraine and to conduct sabotage and assassination and disruption operations of the West. But they're already doing all of this. The way
Yeah.
that Russia ends this is by stopping their invasion. But until they are stopped, until they know that there's no path forward on the military battlefield, that they will continue to lose men, material, and continue. Particularly, I think important is that they'll lose their economy. Um, they'll continue.
Where do you assess their economy? I know we're talking about the drone strike, but the economy in Russia is something that we continue to see sort of headlines saying like the clock is running out on the Russian economy and they're severely limited. And then you still, you see Russia's economy on a near complete war footing, and
Mhm.
they do seem to still have the ability, also enhanced through their partnerships with Iran and North Korea and China, to maintain a certain level of at least military manufacturing. Where do you, because I know you think about these kind of things a lot, where do you kind of put the weight, if you will, on these predictions on Russia's economy over the next 12 months or so?
No, look, I think until there's a material change in the nature of our sanctions and the nature of our targeting the Russian economy as its primary engine of war, it will be able to continue. It's artificially inflated. They've been able to pump money in both from their own reserves and from oil proceeds that the rest of the world is paying. China, India, and Europe are all continuing to buy Russian hydrocarbons, fueling Russia's war effort. Uh, those purchases must stop in order for there to be a material impact on the Russian economy, to draw down the reserves to zero, and to start to have impact on the man and woman in the street.
Anything, anything that I haven't asked that you're thinking about in terms of this situation or how it's playing out that we should be mindful of?
Well, certainly we need to be thinking about the implications for our own security and what this means, in the near and long term, when you can take, a few $1,000s worth of drones and a very sophisticated intelligence operation, which places lethal munitions within, kilometers of strategic facilities, enabling them to destroy in a, essentially over a daytime surprise attack, billions of dollars of material and much of your strategic power. We need to be thinking about how vulnerable we are to that. I was thinking back on, just about a year ago, there was a flurry of reporting about drone sightings over Norfolk, over Andrews Air Force Base, across the East Coast. We see all these purchases, foreign purchases, particularly Chinese, of land resources adjacent to U.S. bases. You think about the openness of U.S. society and the potential vulnerability to networks, and not just state actors, but potentially terrorist actors. Everyone is going to be taking a look at this and saying, what does this now mean? It really has set an entirely new bar, both for the offense and defense.
I mean, that's a great point. I feel like we should almost devote an entire sort of separate conversation towards that, because that's a risk that you raise that comes at a time when, the domestic situation in the United States can be described as relatively volatile. And the US, the domestic security service focus right now is oriented heavily towards the immigration, the southern border. But there are a lot of, what could easily become very soft targets, as you kind of mentioned, that would change the situation in America overnight. So that's certainly
Well,
one that,
you just think of the cost, the cost risk ratio of, if, it costs, takes weeks and, hundreds of thousands of dollars to build these kinetic drones, which are precision guided munitions, right? The other piece with this is that Ukraine's targeting was clearly superb. They knew exactly which airframes. They apparently were using machine vision to target specific aircraft. That capability is proliferating really rapidly, but the ability to iterate really quickly, to produce highly lethal munitions within weeks, taking out material that takes decades to produce and billions of dollars, this is not a small deal.
Paul Colby, thank you for sharing your insights with us today. And I know it won't be long before we'll be talking with you again as this kind of situation plays out. So thank you.
Good to see you, Brett. Thank you.